Hi there. Welcome to today's webinar, The Modern Content Marketer's Tech Stack. I'm Elizabeth Irvin, the Director of Marketing for MarketMuse, a content strategy platform that helps companies find gaps in their content and their competitors' content and create high-quality, comprehensive content at scale. I'm joined today by Eileen Cook, the Head of Content Marketing for Single Grain, a full-service digital marketing agency who does consulting and recently launched a DIY educational division. Thanks for joining me today, Eileen.
Yes, thank you so much, Elizabeth. And it's so cool to see people attending from different countries and saying hi. So yeah, I'm excited for today.
Absolutely. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your panel for any questions that you have throughout the webinar. Please feel free to ask. We will address them as we go if we can. Otherwise, we will tackle them at the end of the webinar. We'll also be recording, so we'll send around an on-demand version within a couple of days of this being complete. So let's get started. We are in the dreaded planning season. It can be fun, but it can also be very stressful. Lots of spreadsheets, lots of discussion, lots of sales calls with demos. So where do you start? How do you begin?
So, I mean, I start with an assessment of our current tools. You know, have we outgrown the tools we have? Sometimes you change a tool, you know, you'll move to a different CRM and find that like nothing integrates with it. So you have to change up the tools and like, you know, what you're not really using. You know, for instance, you and I discussed CoSchedule, but I realized I was really using, I'm kind of old school. I was using Google Sheets for our editorial calendar. And then I moved to Asana, which is project management and editorial calendar. So it just, you know, CoSchedule is pretty affordable, but at the same time, you know, we weren't really using it. And then of course,
part of planning is trimming as well, right?
A lot of trimming, and like, you know, it can be for budget, but it can also be for the learning curve of having all these tools. You know, sometimes you have like 3 tools that do the same thing, like slight variations. And it's like, you just got to choose one. You don't want to train people on all 3. So yeah, how do you decide, Elizabeth?
Yeah, we're very much in the middle of our tech stack planning for next year. And I joined MarketMuse in the beginning of the year, and there were some tools in place already, but really the marketing department was getting started when I joined. So there's a lot to think about, especially with where we are as a company. We're looking to grow fast. So there's certain tools that will help facilitate that, and others that are really more down the scaling line for more of an enterprise focus. So for a startup, there's different things that we need to consider, as well as what our goals are for next year. So one of the tools that we've been evaluating is actually our webinar platforms. We use Zoom internally for video conferencing. We're on video all day, every day. And it was really an easy adoption to use for webinars. We didn't have to get trained up. We were able to just add it to our account. It was affordable. And because it was something that we were testing out and trying this year, it was an easy win in terms of bringing it on. But for next year, we're looking to scale our webinar distribution across not just this kind of webinar educational, but clients and investors. So we want something that's of a higher quality for the user perspective, host perspective, but also from an integration point of view. So Zoom, unfortunately, doesn't integrate with email automation platforms. So every time that we have a webinar, we have to download the attendees and those who didn't attend and manually upload them into the email platform. And it's a lot of wasted time and room for human error. So there's a lot to think about. That's one example, but there's a lot to think about in terms of overall usage, and from a feature perspective, but also budget perspective is going to be a big factor, obviously. but tying it to business outcomes. What are you looking to achieve with the tools that you're bringing in? So where we start is thinking about what our 2019, in this case, 2019 goals would be as a department, but also as an overall business. Where are we going? So for folks on the line, it would be thinking about if you're aiming to increase brand exposure or market share, there's different considerations to take from that perspective than if really the focus is generating high quality leads to your sales team. And the different content that you would use for each of those may differ, and you would need different tools to support that, as well as scaling your programs and processes. And client retention, there's different types of content that you would create for client retention if that's the primary focus, in terms of other elements that may be a little more automated and on autopilot. You may want to think about other types of tools that would help you in that regard. What about on your side? Any considerations?
Absolutely. So we launched this educational division, and we realized webinars were huge to first getting people to understand the launch, also portraying sort of the value of this DIY product. So, I had the same issue with Zoom. We'd do a webinar every time I would, download the CSV, upload to my email automation. So we ended up trying a different webinar software because of sort of the barrier to entry with Zoom, and it's not very customizable. And, Zoom is great, but just for this expansion. And so we chose like a SimuLive webinar platform called EverWebinar, because that's really where we wanted to focus our efforts. And also we had to find an LMS. We ended up choosing Thinkific as our LMS after a lot of assessment of different learning platforms. So that was something else to sort of add into the mix and assess how much does our LMS integrate with all the other things we're using. And the other thing is, like, with iteration, we found we had this long webinar to get people into our educational funnel. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, the long webinar wasn't really doing the trick. And we hadn't used lead pages for a while, but we found that just putting a shorter video on lead pages so there's always that sort of iteration of, what do I need? And like, this isn't working. And like, I'm trying it, but I'm seeing it's not really aligning to my goals. So yeah, I think it really does depend. And we're still marketing our done for you and done with you services, but it's just having to add on this whole other stack.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And since we're still talking about webinars, I'll answer one of the questions in the chat. And you had touched on an element that is a major factor in our choice of tool, which is the SimuLive. Being able to record once and then replay it, but have someone available for questions that come up, so that those who are there feel like it's live, but they still have the opportunity to ask questions and get insight from the speakers. That's a huge opportunity for webinar platforms. The integration is very much a key factor for us in terms of time. We're very lean. So the more we can automate and the more we can build into the process and not having to do manually is a big element. We also, when we put our webinars on demand, we have to download it and sort of edit it as a start and end block. So there's a lot of manual effort into these Zoom webinars. So we're hoping that with the next platform, we can make that a little less time consuming on our part. And we love doing them. So excited to see what we can do with the new one. But we haven't quite chosen yet. But in the meantime, how do you assess ROI, and what tools or formulas do you use when you're going back and looking at the specific line items for tools that you're thinking about?
Yeah, there's a lot of, you know, when presenting the sort of my tool budget to the director of ops, you know, I use just a quick sort of funnel calculator. You can find them, you know, online, where you take your revenue, your sort of the lifetime value of the customer. And from there you can say, okay, like everyone who gets a free consult is, every free consult is worth $50. But, you know, from there it's like, so every subscriber, every lead I generate is worth like $5, which, you know, and then you go back like, okay, well, my traffic is worth, every visitor to the site is worth like $1. And, you know, depending on how, you know, let's say like you have a really high conversion rate between traffic and leads, you know, you could say, hey, like I really need to invest like very heavily in SEO tools, and, you know, maybe even outsource, which is something we're not really covering. But, you know, let's say your traffic doesn't really hugely correlate to your conversion rate, and it's, you know, you might want to use different tools. Like, you know, again, both of us are really focusing on webinars. So while I do, you know, do a lot of work with the SEO beforehand, you might really want to be investing heavily in like the best webinar platform rather than putting money into something else.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, it all ties back to that business impact and the usage. Mm-hmm. You talked a little bit earlier about trimming something that nobody was using. That's something that we look at semi-regularly here, especially as a startup. We kind of look at all these tools that can help us grow. But if the adoption isn't there, then it's not really worth keeping, and you can trim that budget and use it for something else.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And it really is just like the conversion rates, you know, versus budget, and just being really, really smart, doing a ton of research and understanding what's going to integrate. Because, you know, as someone who's worked at a ton of startups, like I can tell you like everything you can integrate. And, you know, let me say here, I know this is Zapier, I think, is one of my favorite tools because it can integrate the unintegratable. And it really saves you just a ton of manual work. So I would highly recommend that be first on your list.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of research that's done out there by analyst firms and surveys by marketing profs and Content Marketing Institute that you can really get a peer-to-peer input of what they're focusing on. There's a really great chart from marketing profs, which I'll have my colleague Roger share around. There's often the 10% gross revenue that's quoted as the average marketing budget. The marketing profs did an analysis and a survey, and startups tend to spend more like, can be 20 to 30% of projected revenue on marketing because they need to gain market share. Their focus is on awareness and getting their brand name out there. I've seen up to 50% used for marketing. So getting really aggressive. And the tech accounts for about 5 to 15% of that budget. So you're focused on people in tech, whereas enterprises where the brand is stable and known, and it's really about scaling the programs. Mm-hmm. You know where your audience is, you know what they respond to, you know where you need to be. So it's really kind of turning the right dials. So I found that quite interesting. It really, again, it just ties back to those business outcomes and what your goals are. And it's easy to get excited and almost distracted by a tool that looks amazing and you want to use so badly, but if it doesn't tie back to what you're aiming to do for the year, then maybe it's something that you wait on. So on that point, let's get to the tech itself.
Yes.
So Eileen, assume you're using WordPress or an equivalent, and you're actively publishing a few posts a week, maybe a few posts a month, or you're about to launch, but let's assume you're dedicated to content. Where do you start?
Yeah. So we love any sort of research or keyword research tools. So BuzzSumo really helps us see sort of what's trending in our field. You know, we look at the most shared articles from our competitors and also what's being shared, because a lot of times you can think everyone loves content on AI, but like if it's not really hitting or no one's sharing it, and this is also something you can look at, you know, Google Analytics, but it really is testing your assumptions. So another thing that we love is Ahrefs, and we also use SEMrush. I would say they're pretty similar, and they're very robust platforms. So probably what I'm using them for, I would see more differences if I went a little bit more, but both are great to, you know, again, track the content gaps between you and your competitors, or you and sort of the companies that you aspire to. Mm-hmm. And also look at your keywords. And, you know, while we don't ever want to keyword stuff, it's really great to look at what you rank for and to build content around that. So what about you?
Yeah, we use similar tools. Those that you mentioned, we use our own as well. We use MarketMuse in terms of finding gaps in what our competitors are not writing about, and where we could be better in writing different topic areas. Our content game really started in the beginning of the year and has ramped up a lot thanks to our amazing content strategist on staff. And we've seen the impact that can have. So really knowing what topics you should be writing about and how, using those various tools can really make a difference. And one other element to that is on the editing side. A few of our clients and partners use tools like Grammarly or Hemingway or Acrolinks to think about the readability and tone and voice, because especially if you're an enterprise where you have how many hundreds or thousands of writers working on content in many capacities, being able to govern what they're talking about or how they're talking about it to make sure it's on brand is going to make a difference and make it a unified voice. So what about project management and publishing? What do you use for scheduling and really owning that content in a central place? Yeah,
well, first I want to say I was actually, this is no plug, but I was actually using MarketMuse yesterday because we needed to expand a landing page on blockchain, in fact. And I was like, okay, there's just a finite number of keywords. So it was really nice to go on to MarketMuse and see where I could expand topically.
Oh, great.
Not a plug, completely organic. So yeah, in terms of project management, when I came on, some people were using Basecamp, some people were using Asana, some Trello, some Monday.com. And it was like, you know, something that we talked about before, Elizabeth, is like there's no perfect platform for everything. I mean, there's always just going to be like little minor things. So avoiding maybe the shiny object syndrome, and like, honestly, especially for project management, I would say you just gotta commit to one. You know, other platforms, you know, some people want to use SEMrush, some people want to use Ahrefs, fine. But like project management, the whole point is that everyone's committed to a project management system. So we just ended up using Asana. It was affordable. It's easy. It's, you know, there are things I wish, you know, there are feature requests I want to make, but you know, at the end of the day, the whole company's on Asana, much easier. We do use Basecamp, however, to work with clients. It's a little bit more robust in terms of client conversations. So sometimes, especially if you're an agency, it's nice to have a platform that's just for client, you know, and then one that's sort of just for internal, just, you know, not having that cross mixing, not accidentally having someone see something. And, you know, like I was saying before, we used to use CoSchedule for publishing, but We just started using Asana, and the nice thing is that you can project manage, this is in draft, this is in editing, and use your due dates as the published dates. And then you can do a calendar view. So you can get a holistic view of your calendar. So it's a little bit of a 2-in-1. And I mean, the other nice thing is you can kind of use a Kanban board with Asana. I think both you and I used Jira at previous companies. So you can use a Kanban board, or you can do a list. So I'm kind of a list girl. So I can use that view.
Right.
So.
I've used Asana as well. It's very, very easy to navigate. The UI is great. We use ClickUp at MarketMuse. And it's nice to be able to have the customized, I think similar to Asana, we can have the customized stages for where things are moving along. Because obviously when there's a piece of content that's being produced, the stage that would go from person to person is going to be very different from what engineering needs. So when you're using a similar tool to engineering, it being able to customize that is really important for marketing and content teams. We are thinking about CoSchedule, which would kind of, it would bring in two tools for that, but we would be bringing that on for the publishing aspect as well, and the social scheduling. So we would be using that for multiple purposes, and probably still using ClickUp for more of the engineering tasks that we need from them. But our content and marketing teams, there's a few folks involved there. So being able to have one place to send everybody and have them focused in and have one calendar to look at is quite nice. So I'm looking forward to trying that out.
Yeah, it's a great platform. We just, sometimes we just trim things just to have not so many. So
yeah, and on the point of trimming, there's some quick ways of identifying, because sometimes you don't even know what legacy tools are still on the credit card, still in play. And you can look in Google Tag Manager to identify some of those tools. I think SpyFu is the other one where you can look at the code and see what tags are on your site, because the more tags you have on your site, the slower it is as well. So trimming is beneficial for multiple reasons. So you have your publishing platform, you know what you're writing about. What other types of content are you creating apart from blog content or articles? And what do you use for that?
Yeah, so it's very meta, but we use a lot of webinars. Great lead gen tool. And it's also like a great way to engage with people. Like I love the Q&As, I love the chats. And actually, oftentimes from Zoom, I'll download the Q&As and I'm like, here are my next month's topics. Yeah. So we definitely do webinars. Like I mentioned, we started with Zoom. And then we moved to EverWebinar, a Simulive platform. And right now we're really experimenting with just having shorter videos and sending ads to an opt-in page and using a video like very much as just a lead magnet. But yeah, I've been happy with Zoom. I wish the registration page was a little bit more customizable, although I loved how Elizabeth did it. I was like, oh wait, I thought you had to do it on Zoom, but this looks beautiful. Podcasts, our CEO really built his business on the strength of his two podcasts, Marketing School with Neil Patel and Growth Everywhere. So we use, he records, but we use Libsyn to just kind of blast the podcast out to everywhere. And Libsyn does not have, the most beautiful interface, I would say, but it really does a good job. And right now we're having an issue with our podcasts, and the marketing coordinator is like emailing the CEO. They have amazing customer service. So that's made it really helpful. Video, a lot of YouTube analytics, and TubeBuddy. So yeah, long story. But what about you?
Yeah, obviously we're using Zoom. I'm quite dazzled by On24, and I listened to one of their webinars yesterday. The interface is just really nice in terms of customizing and the branding aspect. So that's a little bit of the shiny object syndrome for me. But we'll see what we end up doing. I think as long as we're able to integrate with our email automation, whether it's directly or through Zapier, so that we don't have to do it manually, is really important. And then the Simulive, so that we can get more from our webinars. We can replay them easily and with the questions. And finding a way, I haven't actually looked into this, but being able to very easily chop the webinar up. So you can take segments of it and turn it into a short video that you either plug in YouTube or social or into another piece of content, without having to have crazy video editing skills. That would be very valuable.
Yeah, I think I want to get a demo of On24. I'm having shiny objects and
I know.
But there's definitely I've also used GoToWebinar in the past. I've used Zoom. We talked about EverWebinar, and again, it's the integrations. But I haven't found a webinar software that I love. It's always been like a sticking point. And another thing I feel like we always talk about is the interfaces.
Yeah.
I think because we're more on the creative side, and you and I have used project management tools meant for engineers. Oh, Adobe Connect. We just got to chat. It is nice to have a beautiful, but also easy to use interface. So that's a big consideration as well. Yeah. And customer support. I cannot stress enough a good customer support.
Yes, that can turn your love for a product into something much less if they don't have good customer support.
Oh yeah.
I noticed someone asked about Demio, and this was actually something that I only learned about a couple of weeks ago when I was doing some of my research, and I tried them out. So that seems like they have a Simulive. It's really inexpensive. The UI is really nice. It's very similar setup to GoToWebinar and even Zoom. I think the thing that sets On24 apart is the view with the webinar, where you have the video in one box on the side, you have the presentation, you can have extra links. So it's such a beautiful display. I think they're really the only one that I've seen with that kind of setup. And then I see another question about single grain streaming podcasts on Spotify and how you track leads and ROI from that.
Yeah. So again, with Libsyn, just to let you know, I mean, literally it blasts everywhere to Spotify. And actually that is really a very good question. Someone else, sort of my marketing coordinator, really handles the podcast, but definitely it's an interesting medium, because I feel like it's so word of mouth. And it's like people can come to your site, and yeah, you can give them promo codes, but it's hard to set up like a really good attribution system, or I haven't set up a really good attribution system to be like, oh, they came to my site, because people will listen to Eric for years and then all of a sudden come to our site and want to talk to him and want to sign up. It's like, so I will look into that though, because that's actually something that has been on my mind.
Attribution is challenging, especially if it's not built into the platform or easily brought over to your marketing automation platform. If it doesn't transition to what we'll talk about next, if it doesn't transition well to HubSpot or Pardot, then you really lose some of that data. So yeah, attribution is a really challenging thing. It depends as well if you're doing first touch, last touch, or multi-touch, and how you associate those. And that's a whole other can of worms to talk about. But if you're able to derive from the content itself, especially if you own it, it's really, when you're owning it, you can it's a lot easier to attribute leads and ROI. But if it's living somewhere else, that makes it a lot harder. So you have great content, you have great webinars and podcasts. Now let's make sure people know about it. Email can get a bad rap, but it's still one of the most effective channels to communicate with your audience. So what's your approach to email platforms?
Yeah. So I feel like every year I read email is dead, and every year it's like, well, it's the most effective. So we use Drip. I've used quite a few in my previous company. We used Pardot, which was nice because it integrated with Salesforce. Here we use Drip. I really like it. Speaking of interface, there are, like we talked about in EverWebinar, you could integrate it with Drip. Again, there were some limitations. Yeah, and for instance, we couldn't, tag, where the person was coming from. It was just kind of like they watched the webinar, they're in Drip, and you couldn't add like a tag or anything to them. You could just add them to a campaign. But anyways, so yeah, we use Drip, and a lot of, the nice thing is that, obviously it holds all your emails, but it also segments them to campaigns. You can do behavior-based workflows, if this person moved through this campaign but didn't click this, then move them to this campaign or send them this one-off email. So, and it's really easy to use. I feel like integration has been the watchword of the day, but we do end up choosing Drip as sort of our core. I mean, obviously our site is like our core thing, but like Drip is like where the leads and the buys happen. So a lot of our other platforms are driven by what integrates, what's the best integration. And like, there's a lot of, on Zapier, there's also a lot of integrations to Drip. It's just kind of how limited are they, and like, where do we really want to focus our energy? But I'm very happy with Drip. Pardot was great too. Entreport is really good. It's a very robust platform. So you can run your entire business on the platform. I think they've put out Entrepages, which is an easier platform. So what are you using?
So we're actually about to make a transition on our side there. This was also part of my sort of tech restack. So I'll actually take a small step back. So we started out with HubSpot, which is really great for small teams and startups because it has everything that you benchmark baseline need. You can capture emails, you can send emails, you have a WYSIWYG email editor, you can do simple segmentations and campaigns, you have all your source data, you can have some behavioral triggers in there. But what we were lacking was more of, because we have a number of different personas that we're talking to, we have more complicated automated nurtures that we needed to set up. And as we were putting them in HubSpot, it just kind of wasn't hitting the mark. So we're actually about to, we're currently setting up the implementation for Pardot. I feel like I'm going cross-eyed with the back-end admin as it goes, but what we're looking to do there is really more customization for the customer journey and personalization. More sophisticated lead scoring. So the nice thing about tools like Pardot and Marketo and Eloqua is being able to grade leads based on their firmographic information, but then also score them based on their behavioral information. On HubSpot, we had to do a little bit of a hack in order to do that. And it was the lead scoring we used purely for the behavior, and then we used a workflow for the firmographic. So that was kind of our workaround for it. But we wanted something that was a little more sophisticated and something that we could control more and had more trust in. I think HubSpot is really great for doing lead capture, lead generation, and blog management. We had our blog in HubSpot. It had everything that we needed to start. But with the stage that we're in now, we needed to move to something a little more sophisticated. I've used Eloqua in the past, and that is a very robust tool, but it is so amazing what they're able to do with their workflows. And I was previously at a rather large enterprise where there were a lot of different business units and acquisitions that came in, but there were lists across the business units that a single person may be on, but we're trying to get them for our own purposes. So how do we make sure that we're not inundating them with multiple nurtures, and protect them, but also make sure that they're getting value in the place that they care about. So Eloqua was really helpful for us to do that effectively. So it ties back to what the needs are for your audience, what you're looking to do. If you have a very specific audience, something you only need a few nurtures or simple workflows, then HubSpot would be great for that. They do get a little pricier the more contacts that you get. It kind of scales up quite quickly, which was something that we experienced. And if you have multiple types of audiences that you're going after and multiple products that you're communicating about, and even different regions and different languages, something that can manage that a bit better is worth looking into. It is more expensive.
Yeah, it's definitely like such a steep price jump, you know, the more contacts you have. Usually at like 50,000 contacts, it's like it goes from, you know, really affordable to up there. And I feel like here is where my eyes sort of get crummy. There's like so many email and CRM automation tools. And some of them, like, I am in awe of people who are like zip through Marketo, because I've done like a few things in it, and like maybe I'm not like super duper tech, you know, I'm not like the biggest one in the tech. I've really been on like the content and the branding side, but that looked extremely robust. And I think too that MailChimp has made updates which allow some of that behavior based, and MailChimp is probably the most affordable, and like I've heard great things about its ease of use. I love their branding too. I'm a sucker.
I have as well.
Branding.
I've seen their updates too. They've made a lot of really great changes. I haven't really been in their platform itself, but I've heard good things, and it does look like they're starting to add more function and features into their offering. So it sounds like something to consider
if you're just starting out. And I know that they have a really good integration with Squarespace. So it's kind of like the 101 suite, you know, like I think those are both really great places to start that very much guide you through, or very, you know, are really, really helpful. And from there, it's like, as your business gets more complicated, like if you have one campaign with like your weekly newsletter, like MailChimp is fine. If you have, you know, like a million campaigns and you're moving people between them, and if, you know, you have Wistia and they watch only 30 seconds of the video, you need to move them, then you need something more robust.
Right, exactly. So email isn't the only channel that we use for marketing our content. What else do you use in terms of automated promotions, and how else do you get the content out there?
Yeah, so social media, I've used a bunch of platforms. Hootsuite's great. Sorry, I was like, am I off video? Okay. Hootsuite is great. We use Sprout Social now. We were using, when I came on, we were using Hootsuite, I think Buffer, and MeetEdgar. And MeetEdgar is great. It kind of recycles your old content and puts it back out. But it was like just too much. So I looked at all the platforms, and I was like, all right, you know, Sprout Social has these listening capabilities. You can even listen to what people write on your ads. It has something where you can schedule Instagram posts and edit within the platform. So we ended up spending a little bit more than we would on a Hootsuite or Buffer, but you know, we really like it. Community forums, we're not as active on those as I would like to be. And repurposing content is a very, very big one for us, especially with, you know, taking webinar content, making it into a blog. But a lot of these things we actually do manually, besides sort of the email marketing and the social media. What about you guys?
Yeah, very similar. I've used Sprout Social in the past and loved it. We were actually using HubSpot's publisher because we were there and we could tie it directly to our campaigns. It made it easier for reporting, but since we're moving to Pardot and potentially CoSchedule, I think we're going to be using CoSchedule for that social publishing. I like Hootsuite for the social listening. I haven't really used it for publishing, but the social listening is really easy to monitor, and definitely, I mean, it's free as well, so it's an easy one to add in there. Community forums, yeah, I've started posting in Online Geniuses, the Slack community. There's a few others that aren't as active, or sometimes it feels like you're just promoting your stuff along with everyone else promoting their stuff. But there's still some benefit to that, and the branding, because it's especially when you're talking to marketers, there's that association there. And obviously influencer marketing, finding people to create content with you will make it more beneficial for them to promote that as well. And then yes, repurposing content, absolutely.
Yeah.
Anytime you can repurpose or create. So when we're doing a webinar, we'll create a few blog posts leading up to it to kind of start telling that story, and then tie it in with the webinar. So how do you know that it's all working? How do you attribute? Oh, there we go.
There we go. I was like, I look frozen. Am I frozen? So yeah, you know, here's the big place. You have to make the case for the budget. Yeah. Honestly, like Google Analytics does so much more. Like, I feel like, you know, I'm like tip of the iceberg with Google Analytics. It's like a really amazing platform. And I know when you go in further and further, you were talking about Google Tag Manager. I mean, I haven't even dipped my toe there, but I feel like, especially because you can have goals and conversions, I feel like, I feel like I use Google Analytics for a lot. I mean, obviously in Drip, we look at subscriber base, and we can track, you know, how people move and what campaigns are really working. But yeah, I think it depends on like your level of expertise. Yeah, and we've used a bunch of sort of different things that sort of report on everything at once. But I would just say, starting out, really get into Google Analytics and learn. And the other things we use are SEMrush and Ahrefs to track keyword movements. So what about you?
Yes, very similar. Google Analytics, there's putting the time in to set up the lead funnel, so you can see from what content at what point people are coming in. And this often ties back to your marketing automation platform, but by having the right structure in place, it can be a lot more powerful than what it initially looks out to be. It's not just looking at traffic and looking at and looking at sources. You can create goals and structure it so that you can immediately see what content is delivering more conversions than others, and then make changes from there without having to download a report and do analysis. You can just set those goals and evaluate. And we are starting to use the Google Data Studio.
Ooh.
Yes, we started creating reports in that mainly for our content, because we use the funnel reporting within our email automation, so we can see when they come in, where are they in the funnel. But being able to attribute that directly back to content, so we can say all of this that we're doing, all this content, all this effort and this budget that's going in to creating high quality content, this is where they ended up. This is how many became clients. This is how many are in this stage, their MQLs or SQLs. That's incredibly valuable, and is going to make your life a lot easier when it comes to requesting budget and making a business case for ramping up or getting something that may be more expensive, that normally, if you were just saying we need to we need to publish content because that's what we need to do. If you can tie it back to those business outcomes, it's going to make your life a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's really nice. Something that Ahrefs shows you is the value of your traffic. So it'll show you the cost per click of your keywords, like were you to pay for advertising. So to come back and be like, look, my traffic is worth, you know, $1 million. It's basically $1 million free dollars we're getting. Yeah, it's great. And I will definitely check out Google Data Studio.
Yeah.
And we also use ClickFlow. Again, we talked about that, like upgrading and sort of taking, you know, it'll look into like articles that have a lot of impressions, but not a lot of clicks. And you can experiment with titles and meta descriptions and report on the results of those experiments. So especially if you're a little bit more of an advanced SEO, I would highly recommend checking it out.
Right. Yeah. And to tie back to one of your earlier points, knowing the value of your traffic and your leads, that's a great starting point for when you're looking at your lifetime value and your costs, your acquisition costs. That's going to help you figure out where you really need to focus on, and you can break out by channel from there. So how many are you getting in from your blog? What's the cost of those coming in from webinars? And you can associate that cost to all of those channels, and it's yeah, you put on your data hat. And there's a lot of art and science when it comes to content marketing, but also just figuring out where to focus and what tech is going to help you be effective. So understanding that data, as painful as it can be sometimes, is incredible.
Yeah. And Shane says, why not Intercom? We actually do use Intercom, and it's another tool we love. You know, I know I love chatting people. When I get to a site, I'm like, I don't want to call the helpline. I just want somebody to chat me. But beyond that, we can segment people out into different Intercom campaigns. You know, we can say, are you interested in courses? Are you interested in like done for you agency services, and route them through? So great point. Totally forgot about Intercom, but we do use it.
Yes, I've used Intercom in the past as well. And we currently are using Drift. Both are great for those on-site conversations, but also creating a content portal to send people to. So Intercom has the knowledge center that you can create and send people to for questions, whether they're clients or prospects. We're only just starting to scratch the surface of Drift. Really, you just want to make sure that it's working, and that the conversations make sense, and that you can get people what they need. And then from there, you mature into the personas and location, and really figuring out by keywords that they're typing what they're trying to get at, and then showing them the right content to help them get that answer faster. That's gold. There was another question about ActiveCampaign or ConvertKit. And Clavio, I think this was during the email automation section. I actually haven't used any of those. Are those familiar to you? Yeah. I feel bad, James. But no, I haven't used any of those. I'd have to look into them. So let's see how that stacks up. So this isn't the end-all be-all of a content marketing tech stack, but based on our experience in this discussion today, and we did a lot of prep ahead of this to kind of go back and forth as to what we use and what tools work well together, and how we tackled our own planning for next year. Since it's kind of nearing the end, but I'm sure a lot of people just take as much of their time as they can, because it's a lot to plan for and think about. So here's kind of a wrap up of our tech stack. Do you have any final words before we move on to Q&A?
I mean, I just want to reiterate, nothing is perfect. You just got to sort of pick the one you like the most. They'll probably roll stuff out and just get the team to commit. And consider like, it's not just the cost of the platform, it's the cost of everyone having to go and learn and use a different platform. So it's not just like, oh, this is, this is just a little bit more expensive. It's like, consider the time and effort cost, because that's huge when people are using a ton of different platforms, and then you have to do, a lot of integrations. I saw that you put Yoast, amazing free plugin, Yoast, Zapier, my faves.
Mm-hmm. Yes, adoption and time. Yeah, the time factor of bringing everyone up to speed and getting comfortable and using a new tool. That's a cost in and of itself. We're going through that with our Pardot implementation, which we're totally excited about, but it's a lot, and it's going to take some change and a lot of setup. It's going to be a little while before we're really up and running there. But as long as the adoption is there and the value is there, and you can tie it back to those business outcomes, then it's definitely worth it. So we do have a question. We've answered a few questions throughout, but there's one about which platforms exist for looking at what your competitors' top shared content is. So how do you,
Oh, sorry. So Miguel, we use BuzzSumo, and I actually get a daily report of all the competitors' content. If you want to go even deeper, both Ahrefs and SEMrush allow you to do like a competitor gap, kind of what keywords they're ranking for that you're not, and what backlinks and all that. But I mean, honestly, BuzzSumo is great to give you, talk a lot about like skyscraper content, which is taking a lot of shared content your competitors do and just like 10xing it, making it way better. So I would start with BuzzSumo. How about you?
Yeah, very similar. Yeah, it's pretty easy to get, and your description is exactly. I couldn't have said it better. So that definitely makes sense. So there was a question about why not HubSpot. So definitely enjoy HubSpot, and I think HubSpot is a really powerful tool, really easy to use. Intuitive. Once you get in there and play around and kind of like get comfortable, it's incredibly powerful. I think it depends on what stage that you're in, and when it won't have as much of what you need. And I really value. To your point about listening to Eric's podcasts for years, I listened to the HubSpot content, read their content, I did their certifications, and I'd never used HubSpot. I'd never used it, but I did their certifications because they know what they're talking about. They set this up. They set their platform up the way they did for a reason. But I personally think that there's more sophistication in terms of automation and customization for workflows that you can get in other platforms, and it just depends on what your need is. We have another question about infographics and interactive content. Have you used any tools for that, or how do you approach that kind of content?
I mean, in terms of creating infographics, we've just used Canva in the past, or had a designer do it. I know there's a lot of really good ways to use infographics and, slide decks on SlideShare. Also, infographics can get you a lot of backlinks. If you create like a really nicely produced one, people will use it and backlink to you. Just in terms of like the time, I feel like we're not doing as many infographics, and our interactive stuff has really moved over to video, podcast. And then our ebooks have moved down like to sort of checklists, just because I feel like people are really gravitating towards that digestible content. Right. So that's kind of what's happening for us this year.
Yeah, similar. Canva is amazing. So easy to use. If you're not a designer, but you need something that looks sleek and you need it quickly, that's a really wonderful tool for creating that kind of, whether it's content or promotional elements. I've used Seros in the past for interactive content. really sophisticated tool. You actually need either a designer or I don't think we needed a developer for it, but it was, you needed to really know the tool very well in order to create the content. So someone else managed that for us on the creative team. But you were able to have an interactive infographic. So if someone was scrolling down, there would be different things that would pop up, or you could click on something to interact with some of the data. You could do quizzes that were kind of not in a survey form, but on the screen. It's hard to describe without an example.
Like
but
a
there were some
BuzzFeed
really
style
cool
quiz?
you could do. Like a what style?
Like a BuzzFeed style quiz?
Kind of, but I think you could almost click it into different panels in order to either do the quiz or to get information. So it was,
cool.
it was all contained in one place. So that was a really sleek tool. Yeah, so if there isn't anything else, I just want to thank everyone for joining today. If there's any final questions, send them in. But I really appreciate everyone joining, and I hope that you got some great advice, learned about some new tools, and yeah, thanks very much. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thanks
Island.
guys. All right, bye.